Jack Morrison was a man running on fumes and borrowed time. Being a single dad to his 8-year-old son, Tommy, meant life was a constant hustle. A mechanic by day, a food delivery driver by night. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, and every dollar was stretched thinner than a worn-out fan belt. That rainy Tuesday morning was no different. He was late again, cutting through the back roads to get Tommy to school, a shortcut he'd taken 1,000 times. But this time was different. Up ahead, a sleek black Mercedes hit a patch of wet asphalt. Jack watched in horror as the luxury car, a machine worth more than his entire apartment building, spun out of control. It was like a scene from a movie, all slow-motion chaos and the sickening screech of rubber on pavement. The car fishtailed wildly, then flipped. Not once, but twice, before slamming into a guardrail with a sound like thunder. And then, it burst into flames. Tommy screamed from the passenger seat. "Dad!" But Jack was already moving. He threw his beat-up Honda into park, his mind wiped clean of everything but the fire. "Stay in the car, Tommy! Lock the doors!" He didn't think about the danger. He didn't think about his own life. He just saw a person trapped in a burning cage. He didn't know that the woman inside was a billionaire. He didn't know that this single act of courage would tear his simple life apart and rebuild it into something he could never imagine. He didn't know that some accidents aren't accidents at all. He just knew someone needed help. And Jack Morrison always did what was right. The heat hit him like a physical blow, pushing him back. Flames were already consuming the engine, thick black smoke pouring into the sky. He squinted through the fire and saw her. A woman, slumped over the steering wheel, blonde hair stained with blood. The driver's side was a mangled wreck, completely impassable. He circled to the passenger side, his heart hammering against his ribs. He yanked on the handle, jammed. The fire was getting bigger, hungrier. He could hear the hiss of melting plastic and the groan of tortured metal. There was no time. Without a second thought, Jack ripped off his own work shirt, wrapped it around his elbow, and smashed it against the window. The glass spider-webbed, but didn't break. He hit it again, with all the force of a man who spent his days wrestling with stubborn engines. This time the window shattered, raining tempered glass onto the leather seat. Smoke instantly billowed out of the opening. The woman inside stirred, letting out a soft moan. Her seatbelt was cinched tight, the buckle jammed from the impact. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger, a terrifying promise of what was about to happen. "I'm going to get you out of here," he yelled, his voice raw. He fumbled for the pocket knife he always carried, the one he used for stripping wires and cutting hoses. The seatbelt material was tough, designed to save lives, but now it was a trap. He sawed at the thick strap, the seconds stretching into an eternity. The flames were licking at the passenger door now, the heat so intense it felt like it was peeling the skin from his face. Finally, the belt snapped. He reached through the broken window, his arms straining. He got a grip under her arms and pulled. She was heavier than she looked, a dead weight. Her foot was caught on something under the dash. He gave one last desperate heave, hearing the sound of fabric tearing as she came free. They stumbled backward together, falling onto the wet, slick pavement, just as the world erupted. A deafening whoosh as the gas tank ignited. The force of the explosion threw them another 10 feet, a wave of pure heat washing over them. Jack instinctively covered the woman's body with his own, shielding her as debris rained down around them. When the roaring finally subsided, replaced by the crackle of the fire and the distant wail of sirens, Jack looked up. Tommy was running toward them. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but he was holding his dad's phone. "I called 911, Dad, just like you taught me." The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were a startling, piercing blue, even in her blood-streaked face. She tried to speak, but only a weak cough came out. A high-end leather wallet had fallen out of the car during the rescue. Tommy, ever the responsible one, picked it up, holding it carefully. "Don't try to move," Jack said, his voice gentle despite the chaos. "Help is on the way." Her hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy, before her eyes closed again. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Paramedics swarmed, efficiently moving the woman onto a stretcher. A police officer appeared, notepad in hand. "Sir, we need your statement. Your name?" Jack glanced at his watch. He was already hopelessly late for work. "Jack Morrison. My son is late for school. I need to go." The officer was understanding. "Just stop by the station later today if you can. We'll need to get your full account." As they walked back to their old Honda, the air still thick with smoke, Tommy handed him the wallet. "We should make sure she gets this back, Dad." Jack shoved it into his pocket without a glance. He didn't see the platinum credit cards. He didn't see the business cards identifying her as Claire Bennett, CEO of Bennett Industries, one of the biggest tech firms in the country. His mind was on missed classes and the angry phone call he was about to get from his boss. He was just a mechanic, a father. He had no idea the wallet in his pocket was a key, and it was about to unlock a door to a world he never knew existed. A world of wealth, power, and secrets. Secrets that were about to come for him. The garage was Jack's sanctuary, a world of grease and steel he understood. But that afternoon, it felt different. His boss, Mike, a man whose grumpiness was legendary, actually clapped him on the shoulder. "Saw the news at lunch," Mike grunted. "Good work, Morrison." Rico, the other mechanic, was less subtle. He held up his phone, showing a news article with a blurry photo of Jack pulling the woman from the wreck. "You're famous, Hermano, the mystery hero of Maple Drive." Jack just shook his head, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of a transmission repair. Famous doesn't pay the bills. But the world wasn't letting him forget. His phone buzzed incessantly with unknown numbers, reporters most likely. He ignored them. He was a mechanic, not a hero. He just wanted to fix cars, pick up his son, and try to make ends meet. He dropped the wallet off at the hospital front desk, leaving his name and number, and had tried to put the whole thing behind him. But as he was packing up his tools that evening, a sleek, black town car, the kind you only see in movies, pulled into the garage. A man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass stepped out. "Mr. Jack Morrison?" the man asked, his voice smooth and cold. "I'm Arthur Vance, Miss Bennett's legal counsel." Jack wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "Is she okay?" "She's stable, thanks to you," Vance said, his eyes scanning the cluttered garage with a hint of disdain. "Miss Bennett is generous. She would like to express her gratitude, monetarily." The word hung in the air, smelling of oil and condescension. "I don't want any money," Jack said, his voice tight. "I'm just glad she's all right." Vance raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Morrison. Miss Bennett has authorized me to offer you a substantial sum, enough to solve, well, problems like this." He gestured vaguely at the aging garage. Something inside Jack snapped. "Tell Miss Bennett I'm not for sale. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to pick up my son." He walked away, leaving the lawyer standing there amidst the oil stains and worn-out tires. He felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly replaced by a familiar anxiety. The stack of bills on his kitchen counter didn't care about his pride. Later that night, after tucking Tommy into bed, Jack sat staring at that pile of bills. The rent was late, the car insurance was due. Tommy needed new shoes. He was drowning. A knock on the door made him jump. It was late. He opened it to find a delivery man holding a large, expensive-looking envelope. "Package for Jack Morrison." Jack signed for it. His curiosity piqued. Inside was a thick folder. He opened it. His breath caught in his throat. It was a cashier's check for $100,000. There was a note, written on heavy, cream-colored cardstock in elegant script. "Mr. Morrison, please accept this as a small token of my immense gratitude. Your pride is admirable, but your son deserves a life without worry. Claire Bennett." $100,000. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. It was everything he needed. He should have been relieved. He should have been overjoyed. But as he stared at the check, a cold dread washed over him. He noticed a second document in the folder. It was a non-disclosure agreement, dense with legalese, but the message was clear. Take the money. Keep your mouth shut about the accident. Why? Why would she want his silence? It was just a car crash, wasn't it? He walked to the window and looked down at the street. The black town car was still there, parked across the road, its engine off, watching his apartment. $100,000 wasn't a gift. It was a warning. And Jack Morrison was starting to realize he hadn't just pulled a woman from a burning car. He had stumbled into the middle of a war he didn't understand. And he and Tommy were right in the crossfire. Jack didn't sleep that night. The check sat on his kitchen table like a ticking bomb. Every time he looked at it, he saw the lawyer's cold eyes and the fine print of the NDA. He had to return it. He couldn't be bought. The next morning, he drove to the hospital, his resolve firm. He asked for Claire Bennett's room, expecting to be turned away by another suit. Instead, a nurse led him to a private wing that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Claire Bennett was sitting up in bed, a laptop open in front of her. The bandages on her head couldn't hide the authority in her eyes. She looked powerful, even in a hospital gown. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice smoother than he remembered. "I was hoping you'd reconsider." Jack placed the envelope on her bedside table. "I can't accept this." Claire closed her laptop. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze intense. "Why not? Is it not enough?" "It's not about the money," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's about this." He tapped the NDA. "Why do you need me to be silent about a car accident?" A flicker of something. Was it fear? Crossed her face before being replaced by a cool mask of indifference. "My life is complicated. The media can be intrusive. This is simply to ensure privacy." It sounded reasonable, but Jack's instincts, honed by years of listening for the subtle tells of a faulty engine, were screaming that something was wrong. "I'm a mechanic," Jack said slowly. "I know cars. Your tires were top of the line, almost new. The road was wet, but it wasn't an oil slick. For a car like that with modern traction control, to lose it that badly." He let the sentence hang in the air. Claire's composure didn't waver, but he saw her hands tighten on the blanket. "Are you suggesting something, Mr. Morrison?" "I'm suggesting it doesn't add up." She sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "You have no idea what you've walked into. Take the money, Jack. Go home to your son. Forget you ever met me. It's safer for you." The threat was veiled, but it was there. Safer for him. "Is that what this is about?" Jack pressed, feeling a surge of anger. "You're trying to scare me off?" "I'm trying to protect you." Her voice cracked, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her. "There are people who would not be happy that I survived that crash." Before Jack could process that, the door swung open. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, stood there, his face a thundercloud. Behind him was an older, imposing woman with Claire's eyes but none of her warmth. "Claire, what is he doing here?" the older woman demanded, her voice dripping with ice. "Mother, this is Jack Morrison, the man who saved my life." The woman, Eleanor Bennett, looked Jack up and down as if he were something she'd scraped off her shoe. "We had an arrangement, Mr. Morrison. You were paid for your services." "I didn't accept your money," Jack said, standing his ground. "Then you're a fool," Eleanor snapped. She turned to Claire. "The board is in an uproar. Our stock is volatile because of this accident. Julian Thorne is using this as leverage to call for a vote of no confidence. We need to control the narrative, not invite the help into your private suite." Julian Thorne. The name meant nothing to Jack, but the venom in her voice was unmistakable. "Get him out of here, Arthur," Eleanor commanded. Vance stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, I suggest you leave. Now." Jack looked at Claire. Her face was pale, her eyes pleading with him. A silent message. Go. It's not safe. He turned and walked out, the sterile hallway feeling colder than before. As he passed the nurse's station, he overheard two of them whispering. Did you see the police report on the Bennett crash? They found something weird in the wreckage. Some kind of device near the brake line. Jack froze. A device. It wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to kill her, and he was the only witness who'd gotten close enough to the car to potentially see something. The man who had refused to be paid off. He walked out of the hospital and into the rain, a marked man. The $100,000 check was meant to buy his silence. His refusal had just made him a liability. He looked across the street. The black town car was gone. In its place was a dark blue sedan he'd never seen before. A man in the driver's seat was staring right at him, his face grim. They weren't watching him anymore. They were following him. His first thought was of Tommy. He had to get to his son. He had put them both in terrible danger. He started running. Panic was a bitter taste in Jack's mouth. He drove to Tommy's school, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. The blue sedan stayed a casual, terrifying distance behind him. He felt like a fool. He had walked into a den of snakes, armed with nothing but his own stubborn pride. He picked up Tommy, plastering a smile on his face that felt like a cheap mask. "Hey, buddy. How about we go visit Grandpa for a bit?" His father-in-law, George, had been his rock since his wife Sarah died. A retired cop, George had a mind that was still sharp as a tack. If anyone could help him make sense of this, it was him. "Dad, are you okay?" Tommy asked, his young face creased with worry. "You're driving really fast." "Just in a hurry, kiddo." He explained everything to George in the cluttered safety of his father-in-law's workshop. The crash that felt wrong, the check, the NDA, the whispers of a device, the man following him. George listened patiently, his old cop instincts kicking in. $100,000 to shut you up? This isn't some fender bender, Jack. This is big league. Julian Thorne. He's Bennett Industries' biggest rival. Ruthless. Been trying to force a hostile takeover for years. "So he tries to kill her and make it look like an accident?" Jack said, the pieces clicking into place. "It's how these people play," George said grimly. "And you, son, just threw a wrench in his whole machine. You're a loose end. The one person who won't take their money and disappear." A wave of nausea hit Jack. "What do I do, George? I have to protect Tommy. First, we make sure you're not followed here." George went to the window, peering through the blinds. "Blue sedan is gone. Good. You lost him. For now. You and Tommy stay here tonight. Don't use your phone. Don't call anyone." That night, as Tommy slept soundly in his old room, Jack felt the walls closing in. He thought of Sarah. She had been the brave one. She had fought cancer with a quiet strength that had humbled him. What would she think of him now, tangled up in a billionaire's war, endangering their son? He found Sarah's old sketchbook, filled with her drawings for a children's book she'd never had the chance to finish. It was a story about a little robot who was afraid of the dark, but learned to be brave to protect his friends. Jack's throat tightened. He needed some of that courage now. The next morning, while George made pancakes, the news was on the TV. A stern-faced reporter stood in front of Bennett Industries. Sources inside the company say the board is in turmoil following CEO Claire Bennett's accident. Rival magnate Julian Thorne has publicly questioned Bennett's leadership and is pushing for an emergency vote to seize control of the company. Bennett, still recovering, has refused to comment. The report then cut to a photo. It was him. A grainy shot of him at the garage. The plot thickens with the emergence of a mystery hero, a local mechanic named Jack Morrison, who pulled Bennett from the wreckage. Morrison has reportedly refused a substantial reward, leading to speculation about his involvement. Some sources close to Thorne are even suggesting the entire crash may have been staged by Bennett to garner sympathy, with Morrison as a paid accomplice. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. They weren't just trying to silence him. They were trying to frame him, to discredit him. The doorbell rang. George opened it to find a well-dressed woman with a clipboard and a cold, professional smile. "I'm from Child Protective Services," she announced. "We've received an anonymous report concerning the welfare of Thomas Morrison." It was a nightmare, a calculated, vicious attack on the one thing he held sacred. The report alleges neglect, the woman continued, her eyes scanning the house, and that the boy is living in an unstable environment with a father involved in questionable activities. They were trying to take his son. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about NDAs or corporate takeovers. This was a declaration of war, and they had just made the mistake of threatening his child. The fear that had been gnawing at him solidified into something hard and cold. Anger. Pure righteous anger. Julian Thorne didn't know who he was messing with. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a father, and he would burn their whole world down to protect his boy. "It's a scare tactic, Jack," George said, his voice low and steady after the CPS worker left, promising to return. "They want to put you on the defensive, make you desperate." Desperate was an understatement. Jack felt like a cornered animal. They had twisted his heroism into a crime, his refusal of their money into suspicion. Now they were coming for Tommy. "We can't just sit here," Jack said, pacing the floor. "They're going to be back. They'll talk to Tommy's teachers, our neighbors." "So we fight back," George said, his old cop eyes glinting. "They think you're just some grease monkey. Let's use that. You said the car felt wrong. What did you see?" Jack closed his eyes, forcing himself back to the crash site. The smoke, the fire, the smell of gasoline. The passenger side. The wheel well. Something was tucked up inside near the brake line. Wires. Looked like a small box wrapped in black tape. I only saw it for a second before the fire got to it. "And you heard the nurses talking about a device?" "Yes, but the official report will say faulty wiring or something. Thorne will have someone on the inside. A cop, a fire marshal. He'll have paid someone to bury it." George nodded slowly. "So we need proof they can't bury." He looked at Jack. "You saved the woman. Did you happen to save anything else?" Jack's mind raced. He thought about the frantic rescue, pulling her from the car. He remembered her shoe getting caught, the sound of tearing fabric. He'd barely noticed it at the time. Wait, the shoe. He went to the car, his heart pounding. He had thrown his smoke and blood-stained clothes in a heap on the back floor. He rummaged through them and found his torn work shirt. Entangled in a rip near the cuff was a small piece of dark fabric. It wasn't from the seat. It was a heavier canvas-like material. And attached to it was a tiny, metallic object, no bigger than a thumbnail. George examined it under a magnifying lamp. It's a fragment of a circuit board, and this fabric, it's from a bag or a pouch, the kind you'd use to attach something to the chassis of a car. It was proof, a tiny, fragile piece of proof, but it was a start. It was something Thorne didn't know he had. "What about her lawyer, Vance?" Jack asked. "Is he with her or with Thorne?" "Hard to say," George admitted. "These corporate lawyers, their only loyalty is to the money, but Claire warned you. She told you to run. That tells me she knows she's surrounded." The phone rang. George answered, listened, and his face hardened. It was the CPS worker. "She's scheduling a formal interview with Tommy at school tomorrow, with a child psychologist." They were moving fast. "Okay," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. "They want to play dirty. Let's show them dirty." He looked at his father-in-law. "You still have contacts on the force? The ones who owe you favors? The ones who can't be bought?" George smiled for the first time that day. "A few. I need the preliminary accident report, the unofficial one, before it gets sanitized. And I need to know everything about the salvage yard where they took the wreckage of that Mercedes." They were coming for his son. They thought he was just a mechanic. They were about to find out what a mechanic with nothing left to lose could do. He had a piece of a bomb, a father-in-law who used to be a cop, and the fury of a protective father. It wasn't much to go up against a billionaire, but it was a start. And it was going to have to be enough. The salvage yard was a graveyard of metal skeletons, rusting under the perpetual Seattle drizzle. Jack, dressed in his greasiest work clothes, looked right at home. George's contact, a grizzled detective named Miller who owed him his career, had gotten them the location and a 2-hour window before the car was scheduled to be crushed. The official report says brake failure due to a fluid leak, Miller had told them over a burner phone. Total nonsense. The fire was too hot, burned up any evidence, convenient. Now, standing in front of the charred remains of the Mercedes, Jack felt a cold chill. It was a tomb. "Okay," Jack said to George, who was standing lookout. "Let's go to work." This was his world. He knew the anatomy of a car better than his own. He slid under the wreck, the smell of burnt plastic and metal filling his lungs. He ignored the main cabin, the engine. He went straight for the passenger side wheel well, where he'd seen the flash of wires. The fire had done its job. Most of the area was a melted, blackened mess. It looked hopeless. But Jack was patient. He knew what to look for, not the big, obvious parts, but the small things that didn't belong. He ran his fingers over the scorched frame, feeling for inconsistencies. A weld that wasn't factory, a bolt that was too new. There. Tucked behind a warped piece of the subframe, almost invisible, was a small, threaded hole. It wasn't a standard part of the Mercedes design. It was a mounting point. For a bracket. For a device. He used his phone to take a picture, the flash illuminating the tiny, crucial detail. Then he found something else. A thin, high-tensile wire, almost completely melted. But a small section had been shielded by the frame. It wasn't a brake line. It wasn't an electrical wire for the car's systems. It was a tripwire, a detonator wire. Connected to what? He followed its path. It led toward the gas tank. They hadn't just wanted to make her crash. They had wanted to make sure she burned with the car, leaving no evidence behind. It was meant to be a perfect, fiery execution. "Jack, we've got company," George hissed from the entrance. Jack slid out from under the car, pocketing the fragment of wire. A black tow truck from a company he didn't recognize was pulling into the yard. 2 large, unfriendly-looking men got out. They weren't here to haul scrap. "They're early," George muttered. "Thorne's cleaners. They're here to make sure this thing gets turned into a pancake." The men spotted them. "Hey, this is a restricted area. What are you two doing here?" George flashed his old badge. "Routine follow-up. We're done here." The men exchanged a look. One of them subtly reached inside his jacket. "Let's go, Jack," George said, his voice calm but urgent. They started walking toward the exit, not too fast, not too slow. "Hold on," one of the men called out, starting after them. "I need to see some ID." Jack's heart hammered. They were trapped. The yard was a maze of dead cars. Then, from the far side of the yard, came the sound of a crushing machine starting up. A massive, ancient crane began to move, its giant magnet swinging ominously. It was Rico, Jack's friend from the garage. Jack had called him on a burner. A desperate Hail Mary. "I need a distraction, a big one, at the All-City Salvage Yard in 20 minutes. Rico, without asking a single question, had hot-wired the yard's biggest piece of equipment. The crane swung wildly, accidentally dropping a wrecked Ford Pinto right in the path of the 2 goons, blocking them off. "Go!" George yelled. They sprinted for the fence, scrambled over it, and disappeared into the industrial maze of the city, leaving Thorne's men trapped with a maniacal crane operator and a mountain of scrap metal. Panting, they made it back to George's car. Jack held up his phone, showing the picture of the mounting hole and the small piece of wire in his palm. "We have it," Jack said, a grim smile on his face. "We have the proof." "It's not enough to go to the cops," George said. "Thorne will just say you planted it. You're the discredited mechanic trying to cash in, remember? We need more. We need to connect this directly to him." Jack's mind was racing. How? How do you connect a piece of wire to a billionaire? Then he thought of Claire, trapped in that hospital, surrounded by enemies. She had tried to warn him. She was in the middle of this, fighting for her life and her company. He was the only person she could trust, because he was the only one who hadn't asked for anything. "The Science Center Gala," Jack said suddenly. George looked at him, confused. "What?" The news report. It said Bennett Industries is sponsoring a big gala at the Science Center. This Saturday. All the city's elite will be there. The board members, the investors. And Julian Thorne, George finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. He won't be able to hide behind his lawyers and his goons there, Jack said, a plan forming, a desperate, crazy plan. He'll be out in the open. I need to get to Claire. I need to show her this. Together we can expose him. It was insane, a mechanic crashing a black-tie gala to confront a killer. But they had threatened his son. They had tried to frame him. They had underestimated him. He was going to walk into the lion's den, and he was going to make the lion choke on his crimes. Getting into the gala was the first problem. It was the most exclusive event of the year. Tickets were thousands of dollars, and the guest list was tighter than a drum. They'll have facial recognition, private security. You'll never get past the front door, George said, playing devil's advocate. I won't use the front door, Jack replied. He spent the next 2 days studying, not books, but blueprints. He got the public schematics for the Science Center online. He studied the ventilation systems, the service corridors, the catering entrances. He was a mechanic. He understood how systems worked, and every system had a back door. Meanwhile, George was calling in his last, most important favor. He got a meeting with Detective Miller. In a noisy diner, over coffee, Jack and George laid out everything they had. The piece of the circuit board, the fragment of tripwire, the photo of the mounting hole. Miller was a good cop, but he was cautious. This is circumstantial, Jack. It's your word against a man who has half the city council in his pocket. I'm not asking you to arrest him, Jack said. I'm asking you to be there, at the gala, be my backup. If I can get Claire to corroborate, if I can get Thorne to slip up. Miller sighed, running a hand over his tired face. George, you're calling in your chit for this? It's career suicide if it goes wrong. It's for my grandson, George said simply. That was enough. Miller agreed. He and a trusted partner would be at the gala, undercover, waiting for Jack's signal. The night of the gala, Jack felt a strange calm. He was terrified, but it was a focused terror. He kissed Tommy goodbye. His son was safe with George, watching movies, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding across town. Jack dressed in a black catering uniform he'd bought at a thrift store. He slipped through a service entrance in the chaos of dinner prep, a ghost in the machine. He moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the Science Center's underbelly, his heart pounding with every step. He found a utility closet that backed onto the main hall, just as the blueprints had shown. Through a ventilation grate, he could see the entire party. It was a sea of jewels and tuxedos. He saw Claire's mother, Eleanor, holding court. He saw Arthur Vance, the lawyer, whispering to board members. And then he saw him, Julian Thorne. He was laughing, a glass of champagne in his hand, looking every bit the king of the world. He was standing with a group of investors, oozing charm and confidence. And then Jack saw Claire. She had just arrived. She looked breathtaking in a dark blue gown, but her face was pale and strained. She moved with a fragile grace, a queen under siege in her own court. Jack's plan was simple and insane. He had to get to her alone. He had to show her the evidence. He watched as Thorne approached her, his smile predatory. Jack couldn't hear their words, but he could see the tension in Claire's body, the way she flinched when he leaned in close. Then, Eleanor Bennett intercepted her own daughter, a heated, whispered argument. Jack saw Claire's face crumble. He saw her mother gesture dismissively toward Thorne, as if presenting him. It was a setup. Her own mother was selling her out to the man who tried to kill her, all to save the company. Claire broke away from them, her eyes searching the crowd, looking for an escape. Her gaze swept past the ventilation grate where Jack was hidden. He had to act. Now. He slipped out of the closet and into a side hallway. He saw a waiter carrying a tray of drinks. "Excuse me," Jack said, his voice calm. "Miss Bennett requested a bottle of water. In the planetarium. She's feeling faint." The waiter, eager to please the night's host, handed him a bottle without a second thought. Jack walked toward the planetarium, an exhibit hall that was mostly empty during the party. He saw Claire heading in the same direction, clearly seeking refuge. This was his chance. He stepped out from behind a display of meteorites. "Claire!" she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. For a second, he saw fear in her eyes. Fear of him. "Who are you?" she whispered, backing away. "How did you get in here?" "My name is Jack Morrison. I'm the one who pulled you from the car." Recognition dawned, but the fear didn't leave. "You need to leave. You don't know how dangerous this is." "I think I do," Jack said, his voice low. He pulled out the small baggie containing the piece of wire and the circuit board fragment. "Your crash wasn't an accident. I found this in the wreckage." She stared at the evidence, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. Tears welled in her eyes. "They told me I was crazy. My mother, the board. They said I was paranoid." "Thorn did this," Jack said. "And I think your mother knows. She's trying to force you to accept his takeover offer, maybe even merge your lives, to save the company." "She wouldn't," Claire started, but the denial died on her lips. She knew it was true. "We have to expose him," Jack said. "Right now, in front of everyone." "How?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's my word against his. They'll paint me as an unstable woman, you as my accomplice." "He doesn't know what I found," Jack said, "and he's arrogant. He's a predator who likes to play with his food. We just need to get him to admit it." Footsteps echoed in the hall. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, appeared in the doorway. "Claire, your mother is looking for you. The investors from Singapore are waiting." He saw Jack, and his eyes narrowed. "You. I told you to stay away." Claire stepped in front of Jack. "Arthur, was it you? Did you know about this?" Vance's face was unreadable. "My only loyalty is to the company, Claire, and the company needs stability. Julian Thorne offers that." He was a traitor. "Get ready," Jack whispered to Claire. He pulled out his burner phone and sent a one-word text to Detective Miller. "Now." Then he stepped out from behind Claire, facing the lawyer. "It's over, Vance. We have proof," Vance sneered. "A grease-stained mechanic and a hysterical woman? You have nothing." "Don't we?" A new voice. Julian Thorne strode into the planetarium, a smug look on his face. "I must admit, Mr. Morrison, you're more resourceful than I gave you credit for. Following you has been quite entertaining." He knew. He had been watching Jack's every move. The salvage yard, the meeting with Miller. This was all a game to him. "But the game ends tonight," Thorne said, pulling a small, elegant pistol from his jacket. "A tragic end to a tragic story. The unstable CEO and her crazed stalker. A murder-suicide. My security team will find you in the morning. It's a shame, really. I was rather looking forward to our merger, Claire." He aimed the gun at Jack. Claire screamed. But Jack wasn't looking at the gun. He was looking at the small, red recording light on Thorne's own jacket pin. The man was so arrogant he was recording his confession. Just as Thorne's finger tightened on the trigger, the planetarium doors burst open. Detective Miller and his partner stood there, guns drawn. "Drop it, Thorne! It's over!" Thorne laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. He grabbed Claire, pulling her in front of him as a shield, pressing the gun to her temple. "It's not over until I say it is," he snarled. The room was a standoff, a tableau of greed, courage, and terror under the faint light of 1,000 projected stars. Jack's heart was in his throat. His plan had worked, but it had also gone horribly, horribly wrong. He was close enough to see the madness in Thorne's eyes. He had to do something, anything. The air in the planetarium was thick with tension, a silent, deadly standoff under a canopy of artificial stars. Thorne had Claire locked in his grip, the muzzle of his pistol cold against her skin. "Everyone stays back!" Thorne yelled, his voice echoing in the large, dark room. "Or she dies!" Miller and his partner held their positions, their faces grim. They couldn't risk a shot. Jack's mind was racing, calculating angles, options, possibilities. He was a mechanic. He solved problems. and this was the deadliest problem he'd ever faced. He saw it. A chance. A stupid, reckless one-in-a-million chance. To his right was a large, interactive display about planetary orbits. A heavy steel model of the solar system sat on a pedestal, controlled by a panel of buttons. One of those buttons was labeled, "Demonstrate Asteroid Impact." Jack locked eyes with Claire. He gave her the slightest nod, a microscopic movement. He prayed she understood. "You're a coward, Thorne," Jack said, his voice loud, drawing the man's attention. "You can't build anything yourself, so you have to steal it. You couldn't even kill her properly." Thorne's face contorted with rage. "I am a visionary." "You're a murderer," Jack shot back. He took a deliberate step to his right, moving closer to the control panel. Thorne's eyes darted between Jack and the cops. His focus was split. It was the opening Jack needed. He lunged for the control panel and slammed his hand down on the red button. The exhibit roared to life. A pre-recorded narrator boomed, "Catastrophic impact event initiated." The steel model of the planets began to spin wildly, and a heavy metal asteroid on a rail shot across its track, aimed directly at the center of the exhibit. Directly at where Thorne and Claire were standing. For a split second, Thorne was distracted, looking up at the screeching, moving machinery. It was all the time Claire needed. She stomped her high heel down hard on Thorne's instep and drove her elbow back into his ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Jack launched himself forward, not at Thorne, but at Claire, tackling her and pulling her to the ground, out of the path of the flying metal asteroid. The asteroid slammed into the pedestal where they had been standing, shattering it with a deafening crash. Thorne, knocked off balance, stumbled forward. Miller and his partner moved in. The standoff was over. Thorne was disarmed and on the ground in seconds, screaming obscenities. Jack helped Claire to her feet, his body trembling with adrenaline. "Are you okay?" I think so," she said, her voice shaky. She looked at him, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. You saved me. Again." The party outside had descended into chaos, as guests heard the crash and the shouting. Security and police flooded the planetarium. They led Thorne away in handcuffs, his smug confidence finally shattered. They took Vance and Eleanor Bennett for questioning. In the middle of it all, Jack and Claire just stood there, two survivors in the eye of a storm. "The recording," Jack said suddenly, remembering the pin. He knelt beside the discarded jacket and carefully removed the device. He handed it to a stunned Detective Miller. "I think you'll find this very interesting," Jack said. The aftermath was a blur. Flashing lights, police statements, the arrival of federal agents. The story of Julian Thorne's attempted murder and hostile takeover plot was about to become the biggest news of the year. As the sun began to rise, Jack and Claire found themselves sitting on a bench outside the now cordoned-off science center. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. "My company, my family, it's all a mess," Claire said quietly, staring at her hands. "You'll rebuild it," Jack said. "You're a survivor." She looked at him, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "We are survivors." She hesitated. "That check, the NDA? I was trying to get you out of the line of fire. I knew he'd see you as a threat. I never thought he'd go after your son." "I know," Jack said. And he did. He understood now. "I owe you everything, Jack," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My life, my company. How can I ever repay you?" Jack thought of his son, safe at home with his grandfather. He thought of his small apartment, his mounting bills, his simple, complicated life. He looked at this billionaire, this powerful woman who had been brought to the brink. "How about we start with a cup of coffee?" he said. "And you can tell me what it's like to not have grease under your fingernails." She laughed, a real, beautiful laugh that seemed to chase away the last of the night's shadows. "I think I can arrange that." A car pulled up, not a town car or a police cruiser, but George's old, reliable sedan. He got out, his face etched with worry until he saw Jack was safe. "It's over, George," Jack said. George just nodded, pulling his son-in-law into a rough, heartfelt hug. Jack introduced Claire. George, the retired cop, simply looked at the billionaire CEO and said, "You keep my boy out of trouble now, you hear?" "I'll do my best, sir," Claire replied, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time. As they drove away from the scene of the battle, Jack knew his life would never be the same. The road ahead was uncertain. The media frenzy would be insane. Claire's world was a universe away from his. But for the first time in a very long time, Jack Morrison felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah got sick. Hope. A tiny, fragile, but persistent glimmer of hope, like a single star in a dark planetarium. And right now, that was more than enough. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of headlines and legal battles. Tech tycoon's murder plot, foiled by mechanic hero. Julian Thorne's confession, captured on his own spy pin, was airtight. He, along with Vance and a handful of paid-off security and police officials, were facing a mountain of federal charges. Eleanor Bennett, in a bid to save the family name, cooperated fully with investigators, painting herself as a concerned mother duped by Thorne's charm. She was disgraced, but she avoided jail time, effectively exiled from the company she had tried to save through betrayal. Jack became an unwilling celebrity. Reporters camped outside his apartment and the garage. Talk shows offered him huge sums for his story. He turned them all down. "You could be rich, man," Rico said, shaking his head as he helped Jack fend off a particularly persistent journalist. "You're a hero." "I'm a mechanic," Jack said for the 100th time. "And a dad. That's all." But his life had irrevocably changed. The first change came in the form of a letter from CPS, formally closing their case with a sincere apology. The anonymous tip had been traced back to a disposable phone purchased by one of Thorne's associates. The second change was Claire. She was true to her word. They had coffee, then dinner. She insisted on meeting at a small, family-owned diner near his garage, a place where no one cared about her last name. She was different away from the boardrooms and galas. She was funny and sharp, and surprisingly down-to-earth. She listened, really listened, when he talked about cars, about Sarah, about his dreams for Tommy. She showed him a picture of the children's book Sarah had been working on. Jack had shown it to her one night, and Claire had it professionally scanned. The drawings were whimsical and full of heart. "She was incredibly talented, Jack," Claire said, her voice soft. One Saturday, she showed up at the garage, not in a town car, but in a restored 1969 Ford Mustang. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, but still managed to look like $1,000,000. "It's got a weird knock in the engine I can't figure out," she said, popping the hood. Jack spent the afternoon with her, their heads bent over the rumbling engine. He taught her how to diagnose a sticky lifter. She taught him about the complex algorithms her company was designing for self-driving cars. They were from different worlds, speaking different languages, but somehow, under the hood of that classic car, they understood each other perfectly. Tommy adored her. She never spoke down to him. She listened to his elaborate ideas for inventions, her eyes lighting up with genuine interest. She brought him a sophisticated robotics kit, and instead of just giving it to him, she spent a whole Sunday on the floor of Jack's cramped living room, helping him build it. Jack watched them, a strange ache in his chest. It felt right. It felt like a family. But the shadows of their different worlds were long. "What are we doing, Jack?" Claire asked one evening as they sat on the steps of his apartment building, watching the world go by. "I have no idea," he admitted. "The media is calling us a fairy tale. The Mechanic and the Princess," she said with a wry smile. "My world is complicated. It's messy and full of expectations." "My world has rent to pay and a kid who needs new sneakers," Jack countered. "I want to help," she said, her voice earnest. "Let me help, not as a reward, as a partner." She had an idea, a crazy, brilliant idea. She wanted to invest in Mike's garage, not buy it out but partner with them, to create a new kind of vocational school, A place where kids who weren't destined for college could get hands-on training in mechanics and robotics, side by side. A bridge between his world and hers. She wanted to fund it through a new charitable foundation, which would be seeded with the profits from one other project. She wanted to publish Sarah's book. We could get the best illustrators to finish it, to color it, she said, her eyes shining with passion. The proceeds could go to children's cancer research and to fund the school. It would be her legacy, Jack. It would help so many kids. He was speechless. It was a perfect, beautiful idea, a way to honor Sarah, help his community, and build something real with Claire. But fear was a cold hand on his heart. Fear of what people would say, that he was a gold digger after all, fear that her world would eventually swallow his, that he and Tommy would become her latest pet project. That night, Tommy found him staring at Sarah's sketchbook. "Claire's really nice, Dad," Tommy said quietly. "She doesn't try to be like Mom. She's just Claire, and she looks at you the way Mom used to." An 8-year-old's simple, devastating truth. The next day, Jack gave Claire his answer. "Yes," he said, "on one condition. Anything. You let me teach you how to change your own oil." Her laugh was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. They announced their joint venture, the Bennett Morrison Initiative. The news went wild. Some called it a brilliant philanthropic move. Others called it a PR stunt. Jack didn't care. For the first time, he felt like he was building something, not just fixing what was broken. A few months later, the first edition of Sarah's book, The Robot Who Learned to Fly, arrived from the publisher. The illustrations had been lovingly colored by a top artist, but they had kept Sarah's original spirit intact. On the dedication page it read, "For Sarah, and for all the families who find love in unexpected places." Jack opened the book with trembling hands. Tommy sat beside him. They read it together, their voices thick with emotion. When they finished, Tommy looked up at him. "Mom would have really liked Claire, Dad." "Yeah, buddy," Jack whispered, pulling his son into a hug. "I think she would have." Outside, the world could clamor and gossip all it wanted. But inside their small apartment, surrounded by the legacy of a woman they had lost and the promise of a woman they had found, a new family was being built. Not a fairy tale family of mechanics and princesses, but a real one. Built on respect, courage, and a shared love for a little boy and his mother's beautiful, unfinished story. And they were about to write the next chapter, together. 1 year later, the Morrison Bennett Community Center was a noisy, vibrant hub of activity. The old garage had been expanded and retrofitted, gleaming with new tools and state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment on one side and a brightly lit robotics lab on the other. Jack, now the center's director, moved through the space with a sense of purpose he'd never known. He wasn't just fixing cars anymore, he was helping to fix lives. He watched as a group of teenagers, kids the school system had written off, worked intently on a complex engine rebuild under Rico's guidance. In the other room, Claire was leading a coding workshop for a younger group, including Tommy. She had stepped back from the day-to-day grind of being CEO, taking on a more creative role as Chief Innovation Officer for her company, a move that allowed her more time for the center. She was a natural teacher, patient, and inspiring. Their lives had found a rhythm. It wasn't always easy. The press was a constant presence, and Claire's family still treated Jack with a polite but visible condescension. But they were a team. Sarah's book was a runaway success, a bestseller that had raised millions for cancer research and for the center's endowment. It had become a symbol of hope for blended families and people starting over. One afternoon, Jack found Claire in the quiet corner of the center they had turned into a small library, funded entirely by the book's sales. She was holding a framed piece of art. It was one of Sarah's original drawings from the book, the little robot, afraid, looking up at a vast, starry sky. "A collector offered a ridiculous amount of money for this," Claire said softly. "I told him it wasn't for sale. It belongs here." Jack said, standing beside her. Everything feels like it belongs now, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Us. This place. It all fits. Tommy ran in, his face glowing with excitement. Dad, Mom, you have to see this! They both froze. It was the first time Tommy had called Claire Mom. He flushed, realizing what he'd said. I mean, Claire! Claire knelt down, her eyes gentle. It's okay, sweetie. You can call me whatever feels right in your heart. Tommy beamed. He led them to the robotics lab. His project for the annual tech fair was complete. It was a small, beautifully engineered robotic arm. With a few commands, the arm reached out, picked up a wrench, and perfectly tightened a bolt on a small engine block. It's a mechanic's helper, Tommy explained proudly. It combines your work, Dad, with your work, Mom. A bridge. Their son had built a literal bridge between their two worlds. Jack felt a wave of love so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. Love for his brilliant son. Love for the amazing woman standing beside him. And a deep, abiding love for the wife whose legacy had made all of this possible. That evening, after the center had closed and the hum of activity had faded, Jack took Claire to the roof. They had installed a small garden up there, a quiet oasis overlooking the city. I've been thinking, Jack said, his heart pounding. He was more nervous now than when he'd faced Thorne's gun. About that robot, the one who learned to fly. The book says he was scared to leave his factory, but he did it because he found a new star to guide him. He looked at Claire, her face illuminated by the city lights. You're my new star, Claire. He got down on one knee. He didn't have a diamond ring. He had something better. He held out his hand. In his palm was a simple polished steel nut, a lock nut from the engine of her '69 Mustang. I know it's not much, he said, his voice thick with emotion, but it's from my world, and I want to spend the rest of my life building a world with you. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she laughed. A lock nut? Jack Morrison, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, a kiss full of promise and partnership, and the shared understanding of two people who had saved each other in more ways than one. Yes, she whispered against his lips. My answer is yes. Down below, a light flicked on in the library. It was Tommy, unable to sleep, come to look at his mother's drawings. He looked up and saw them on the roof, silhouetted against the night sky. He couldn't hear their words, but he could see them holding each other. He smiled. His family was complete. The robot had learned to fly, and home, he now knew, wasn't a place. It was the people who gave you wings. Jack and Claire's story became a different kind of legend. Not a fairy tale of a princess and a pauper, but a real-life story of two people from different worlds who chose to build a bridge instead of a wall. Their wedding was a small, private affair, held right in the middle of the community center, with the students and their families as the guests of honor. Rico was the best man, and Tommy, with a new, specially designed robot, was the ring bearer. They proved that love isn't about changing for someone, it's about building something new together. And that sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do is not just save a life, but have the courage to build a new one. If you were inspired by Jack and Claire's journey, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You never know when courage will strike, or when the next great love story is waiting just around the corner, in the middle of a burning car. Thanks for watching.